Hello, this video is the part 5 of the lesson titled The Importance of God's Words. In part 4 of this lesson, we discuss that it is very possible that we believe that we have God in our lives or we are already saved, but in the eyes of God, we have no God or we are not yet saved. We have also discussed that Satan keeps on negating what God says. He always removes the knot if there is a knot, and he inserts a knot if there is no knot. He worked in that manner in the Garden of Eden. He did not stop there because he is working in the same manner 24/7 even in churches today. In part 4 of this lesson, we also discuss what Christ predicted to happen during the judgment day. Many of those who have seemingly strong faith in Christ will complain, but Christ will not acknowledge them and will treat them as evildoers. One of the things that makes one an evildoer is adding to God's words. We have also put to the test the Protestant groups, and they failed in some way because James wrote that we are justified by works and not by faith alone. Christ's predicted complaints strengthen the point of James. We have also discussed how the scripture could lead us to salvation. In this video, we will see whether or not we have really read the Bible. We will also see that history really repeats itself. This means to say that what happened during the time of Christ is also happening today. I hope we are not doing the same things that the religious leaders were doing during the time of Christ, where Christ was not happy with them. Let us now move to the next subtopic in this lesson titled The Importance of God's Words. In Matthew chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, we can read, At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry, and they began to pluck heads of grain and to eat. When the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, Look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath. This is just a simple story, but we can get something very important out of this. It mentions about Sabbath, but it is not our topic here. It seems that the disciples committed stealing by plucking the heads of grain and eating them, but it is not our topic here. To understand this better, let us familiarize ourselves about the Pharisees. In Matthew 23 verses 1 and 2 we can read, Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, The scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. Here Christ described the scribes and the Pharisees as the people acclaimed to be well-versed in the scriptures. They are the ones who are trusted by the people in terms of interpreting the laws of Moses. The word scribes is rendered as teachers of the law in other Bible translations like the New International Version as shown in the screen. But if we check the Greek text, it is really scribes. But since they are good at teaching the law of Moses, they are considered as teachers of the law. What made the scribes good at teaching the law? What was their work? From the term scribe, we can get the word to scribble or to write. The scribes were copyists of the scriptures. They did not have printing press to mass produce the scrolls in their time, so they had to copy the scriptures by hand, usually inside a scriptorium. Inside a scriptorium, one would have a scroll, and the scribes would copy the contents of the scroll. The one with the scroll would dictate, say for example, a sentence, and the scribes would copy it. Since they were copying the scriptures, they would make sure that they produce error-free copies. To do this, the one with the scroll would repeat his dictation several times, and the scribes would repeatedly read the sentence that they wrote to make sure the copy would be free from error. Because of reading the scriptures several times, when they copied them, they were very familiar with the scriptures and could teach them with high degree of accuracy. Now, what was the problem with the scribes and the Pharisees? In Matthew 23 verse 3, Jesus said, Therefore, do whatever they teach you and follow it, but do not do as they do, for they do not practice what they teach. So according to Christ, they were good at teaching, but they did not practice what they taught. In Matthew 23 verse 4, Jesus said, They tie up heavy burdens hard to bear, and lay them on the shoulders of others, but they themselves are unwilling to lift a finger to move them. This means that they had made some laws on top of the scriptures, but they were not willing to practice them. In Matthew 23, verse 5, Jesus said, "They do all their deeds to be seen by others, for they make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long." According to Christ, they wanted to be obvious to the people by their appearance. Just like in our time, if we see someone wearing a priestly vestment, we can easily tell that a person is a priest, even if he is still far from us. The same was true to the scribes and the Pharisees. They could easily be recognized as such because of what they were wearing. In Matthew 23, verses 6 to 7, Jesus said, "They love to have the place of honor at banquets, and the best seats in the synagogues, and to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, and to have people call them rabbi." This means that they wanted to be treated as very important persons or VIPs at banquets, in the synagogues, and in the marketplaces. They also loved to be called rabbi by the people, which means teacher. In summary, the scribes and Pharisees were highly trusted by the people as authoritative in terms of interpreting the scriptures. The people looked up to them as the individuals who could help them in religious matters, especially in understanding the scriptures. But why do we have to know who they were? Let us now go back to Matthew 12, verses 1 and 2. Again, in Matthew 12, verses 1 and 2, we can read, "At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry, and they began to pluck heads of grain and to eat. When the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, 'Look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath.'" Our discussion is not about Sabbath, nor about stealing. We will be focusing on the reply of Jesus Christ to their question. In Matthew 12, verses 3 to 4, we can read, "He said to them, 'Have you not read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God and ate the bread of the presence, which it was not lawful for him or his companions to eat, but only for the priest.'" In this passage of scriptures, Christ never answered the question of the Pharisees. He asked them a question saying, "Have you not read?" How come Christ asked them that question? Let us remember that the Pharisees, according to Christ, sit on Moses' seat, as discussed earlier. They were the ones to whom the people looked up for the interpretation of the scriptures. But Christ asked them, "Have you not read?" Then Christ directed their attention to the story in the book of Samuel. The Pharisees earned 1 point from Christ's question. In Matthew 12, verse 5, Jesus said, "Or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple break the Sabbath and yet are guiltless?" In this verse, we can read that Christ asked them the same phrase, "Have you not read?" again. He reminded them that the priests did not violate the Sabbath even if they served God's people on the Sabbath day. So at this point in time, the Pharisees earned a total of 2 points already for that question because Christ asked them twice, saying, "Have you not read?" Let us see more examples of the same kind as discussed a while ago. In Matthew 19, verse 3, we can read, "Some Pharisees came to him, and to test him they asked, 'Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any cause?'" Here the Pharisees asked Christ about divorce. But our discussion is not about divorce. We will focus on the reply of Christ to them. In Matthew 19, verses 4 to 5, we can read, "He answered, 'Have you not read that the one who made them at the beginning made them male and female, and said, For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh.' Then in verse 6 we can read, 'So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore what God has joined together, let no one separate.'" Christ asked again the Pharisees the same question, saying, "Have you not read?" Let us remember that the people looked up to the Pharisees for the interpretation of the scriptures as discussed earlier. Here the Pharisees were asked again by Christ. They earned another point for the same question. The Pharisees have now earned a total of 3 points from Christ for the same question. How come? Let me have a detour first. I had 3 students of the Bible before who did not ask me any question for several meetings. My Bible lessons at the time were not of the same quality as the Bible lessons that I have now. These students finally asked me a question. Unfortunately, it was the first and the last question because they decided to discontinue our Bible studies because they would like to stick to their existing belief. I am sharing it here because other people may have the same question, and I hope it will be answered here. You may also encounter the same question to your prospects, and I hope you can answer them by giving some examples from what I will give in this video and another video in part 7 of this lesson. What was their question? They asked, how come that when we study the Bible, we jump from one verse to another, not page by page? I told them that we will still get something by reading the Bible page by page. But when we study a certain topic, it's best to collect verses relevant to the topic at hand. In this subtopic, I will share 2 examples from Jesus Christ himself. I will share one in this video, and I will share another one in another video, which is the part 7 of this lesson, Lord willing. Let me use Matthew 19 verses 4 to 5 as the first example. In Matthew 19 verses 4 to 5 we can read, He answered, have you not read that the one who made them at the beginning made him male and female, and said, for this reason a man shall leave his father or mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh? Let us take note that Christ quoted 2 passages of scriptures in these 2 verses. The first one is the phrase, made them male and female. It is found in verse 4. There are 2 possible sources of this quotation. It can be either Genesis 5 verse 2 or Genesis 1 verse 27. The second quotation is found in verse 5. For this reason, a man shall leave his father or mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. In Genesis 5 verse 2 we can read, male and female he created them, and he blessed them and named him humankind when they were created. The statement male and female he created them is probably the one that Christ quoted in Matthew 19 verse 4. But if you check Genesis 5 verse 3, it is not about leaving his father and mother. In Genesis 5 verse 3 we can read, when Adam had lived 130 years, he became the father of a son in his likeness, according to his image. He named him Seth. It is not what Christ quoted in Matthew 19 verse 5. In Genesis 1 verse 27 we can read, so God created humankind in his image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. But Genesis 1 verse 28 is not the same as what Christ quoted in Matthew 19 verse 5. In Genesis 1 verse 28 we can read, God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. So where did Christ get what he quoted in Matthew 19 verse 5? If we check Genesis 2 verse 24, it is there. In Genesis 2 verse 24, we can read, therefore a man leaves his father and his mother and clings to his wife, and they become one flesh. So it is now clear that Christ might have quoted Genesis 5 verse 2 and jumped to Genesis 2 verse 24, or from Genesis 1 verse 27 and jumped to Genesis 2 verse 24. It is not wrong to jump from one verse to another, as long as the verses contribute to the topic at hand. If we claim to follow Christ because we are Christians, then we shall also follow his way of using the scriptures. Let's now return to our main discussion regarding Christ's repeatedly asked question. In Matthew 21 verse 15 we can read, but when the chief priests and the scribes saw the amazing things that he did, and heard the children crying out in the temple, Hosanna to the Son of David, they became angry. Here the chief priests and the scribes were indignant to Christ because the children kept on praising Christ. I think many people believe that the priests are the interpreters of the scriptures. Moreover, these priests were not ordinary priests because they were chief priests. We know already why the scribes are rendered as teachers of the law in some Bible translations. It was discussed somewhere at the beginning of this video. Now in Matthew 21 verse 16 we can read, and said to him, do you hear what these are saying? Jesus said to them, yes. Have you never read, out of the mouths of infants and nursing babies, you have prepared praise for yourself? Let us take note of Christ's question. Yes, have you never read? How come that they were hit by the same question of Christ? The people looked up to them for the interpretation of the scriptures, but Christ asked, have you never read? So, at this point in time, both the chief priests and the scribes earn 1 point each. Of course, the Pharisees are the highest pointers with a score of 3 points. Now, how reliable are the chief priests and the scribes in terms of interpreting the scriptures? In Matthew 2, verses 1 and 2, we can read, "In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, 'Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage.'" This is the story of the wise men inquiring about the place where Christ was born. They spent so much time just to come and worship the child Jesus, the newborn King of the Jews. In Matthew 2, verse 3, we can read, "When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him." King Herod was not happy, and all his constituents. Why? According to some scholars, King Herod was an Idumean of the lineage of Esau. If that is the case, then Herod was threatened in his position because of the newly born king of the Jews. Because of this threat, King Herod plotted to kill Christ. To make sure that he could kill Christ, King Herod inquired about the exact place of the birth of Christ and the best approximation of the time of his birth. In Matthew 2, verses 4 to 6, we can read, "And calling together all the chief priests and the scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, 'In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are Benjamin's least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel.'" Take note that King Herod called all the chief priests and the scribes in order to inquire as to where the Christ was to be born. This tells us that in the eyes of the people, the chief priests and the scribes are very authoritative in terms of interpreting the scriptures. Even the highest ranking official of the land trusted them for their accuracy of interpreting the scriptures. Otherwise, King Herod would not have called them and inquired from them. And the chief priests and the scribes did not fail King Herod because they were able to pinpoint the exact birthplace of Christ using the prophecy written by the prophet Micah. But the chief priests and the scribes failed before Christ, and both earned 1 point each for Christ's question, "Have you not read?" or "Have you never read?" I hope we won't fail. Before we go back to Christ's repeatedly asked question, let us discuss some important lessons from King Herod's attempt to kill Christ. In Matthew 2, verse 7, we can read, "Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Because of his evil intention, he tried to know the exact time when Christ was born. After knowing it from the wise men, he pretended to be interested in worshiping Christ." In Matthew 2, verse 8, we can read, "Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, 'Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage.'" He actually wanted to kill Christ, not to worship him. Will he succeed in his evil plan? God saw the secret evil plan of Herod because God sees everything. In Matthew 2, verses 12 to 15, we can read, "And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. Now after they had left, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, 'Get up, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you. For Herod is about to search for the child, to destroy him.' Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother by night, and went to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, 'Out of Egypt I have called my son.'" We can just imagine how excited Herod was to kill Christ. Bethlehem is just less than 10 kilometers away from Jerusalem. The wise men could reach it in less than 2 hours and be back maybe after 5 to 6 hours. Most likely Herod was already waiting eagerly for the return. But that day, the wise men did not come back. He was probably expecting that they would come back the next day. But still, they did not come back. Probably in less than a week, Herod already realized that he was betrayed or tricked. It did not take him a year or more to realize this because he was bent on killing Christ. So in Matthew 2 verse 16 we can read, "When Herod saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, he was infuriated, and he sent and killed all the children in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had learned from the wise men. That's how determined Herod was. To make sure that Christ would be killed, Herod ordered to kill all the boys that were 2 years old or under in and around Bethlehem. The age was determined according to his estimate based on what he got when he inquired from the wise men, as we can read in Matthew 2 verse 7. This killing of the boys that were 2 years old or under tells us that Christ was not a baby anymore when the wise men arrived in Jerusalem. It is contrary to what is portrayed during Christmas, where Christ is still a baby lying in a manger when the wise men arrived. When the wise men arrived, Christ was not in a manger anymore, but was in the house already. In fact, in Matthew 2 verses 9 and 10 we can read, "When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, and it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. Let us now see, where did the wise men enter and give their gifts to Christ? Was it in the manger or in the house?" In Matthew 2 verse 11 we can read, "On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chest, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh." The wise men entered the house, not the manger. So it seems that many people today have not really read the scriptures because they always depict Christ lying in a manger when the wise men offer their gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. I hope Christ will not tell us, "Have you not read that when the wise men visited me, I was already in the house?" So let's study more the words of God to avoid being asked by Christ, "Have you not read?" Let us now continue exploring the other examples of people hit by Christ's repeatedly asked question, "Have you not read?" In Matthew 21 verse 42 we can read, Jesus said to them, "Have you never read in the scriptures? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This was the Lord's doing, and it is amazing in our eyes." Christ asked the same question again to some people. To whom did Christ ask it? We cannot answer this unless we go back to verse 23, where Christ was questioned about his authority to teach. In Matthew 21 verse 23 we can read, "When he entered the temple, the chief priests and the elders of the people came to him as he was teaching and said, 'By what authority are you doing these things? And who gave you this authority?' So the ones hit by Christ's question were the chief priests and the elders. The chief priests earned 2 points already, here and in Matthew 21 verses 15 to 16. The elders earned 1 point for the same question. But who were the elders? They were not very old people who could hardly walk. They were very religious and had introduced many human teachings on top of the scriptures, which were called the traditions of the elders. In the upcoming videos, we will see that they were very active in the religious affairs of Israel. God would sometimes command Moses to gather the elders. They were always conniving with the chief priest in contradicting Christ and denying the resurrection of Christ. In Matthew 28 verses 11 to 15, we can read, "While they were going, some of the guard went into the city and told the chief priest everything that had happened. After the priest had assembled with the elders, they devised a plan to give a large sum of money to the soldiers, telling them, 'You must say, his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. If this comes to the governor's ears, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble.' So they took the money and did as they were directed. And this story is still told among the Jews to this day." To summarize, so far we have 1. The Pharisees earned 3 points, as we can read in Matthew 12 verse 3, verse 5, and chapter 19 verse 4. 2. The chief priest earned 2 points, as we can read in Matthew 21 verses 15 to 16 and verse 42. 3. The scribes earned 1 point, as we can read in Matthew 21 verses 15 to 16. And 4. The elders earned 1 point, as we can read in Matthew 21 verse 42. Christ asked 5 times the same question, and 4 groups of people were hit by his question. I hope we will not be hit by the same question from Christ. Let's make a detour from our main course in tracing Christ's repeatedly asked question. One time, we had an experience in the late 80s when we went from house to house inviting people to study the Bible with us. One man told us, "As long as I do not kill, steal, commit adultery, bear false witness, etc., there is no need for Bible study." He seemed to imply that if we follow the Ten Commandments, that would be enough. No need for Bible study. In other words, once goodness is enough, no need to study the Bible to be saved. Now let us remember what Christ said in Matthew 25 verses 31 to 33, where Jesus said, "When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people from one another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep at his right hand, and the goats at the left. This will happen because Christ said it." What will Christ say to the sheep? In Matthew 25 verse 34, Jesus said, "Then the king will say to those at his right hand, 'Come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. As for the goats, what will he say to them?' In Matthew 25 verse 41, Jesus said, "Then he will say to those at his left hand, 'You that are accursed, depart from me into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels.'" The separation of people will definitely happen because Christ himself said it. Now, what if Christ will say, "Before I will separate you, I will give you the chance to choose between the two groups, depending on what group you think that you deserve to be in"? Which group will that man choose? The one who told us that as long as we are good persons, there's no need for Bible study. Definitely, he will choose the group to the right side of Christ, that is, the group that is considered as the sheep. What if Christ will say, "Now that you have chosen the group where you think you belong to, justify why you belong to that group"? What will be the justification of that man who told us that Bible study was not necessary if we were good persons? He will probably say to Christ, "Lord, when I was on earth, I did not kill, I did not steal, I did not commit adultery, I did not bear false witness, etc." What will Christ probably reply to him? Would it be possible for Christ to ask him, "Have you not read that someone who is a better person than you are needs Bible study to be saved"? That is a possibility. But do we have a biblical example of a good person that needs Bible study to be saved? Yes, we have. In part 6 of this lesson, we will discuss about a good person who needed Bible study to be saved. God even sent an angel to this person to confirm his goodness. But his goodness was not enough. He needed Peter to share with him the words that could save him and his household. So I hope you will watch that video for further details. In part 6 of this lesson, we will also discuss another group of people that was hit by Christ's repeatedly asked question, "Have you not read?" I hope you will watch the next video to know more about this group of people. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you have learned some very important truth, and I hope that you will share this to your loved ones, friends, and acquaintances.